Welcome to our workplace harassment prevention training. This one's just for supervisors. Before we get started, just a quick heads up. If you haven't already watched our general harassment prevention training for all employees, you'll want to do that first. So just hit pause on this video and use the link in the description below to watch the video called Workplace Harassment Prevention Training: How to Stop Bullying, Discrimination, and Retaliation. Once you're done, come back to this video and we'll get started, but you'll definitely need the info from the general training to really make sense of what we're covering here. It gives important context that we'll be building on in this video. This training includes real-world examples, legal definitions, and interactive features, so stay engaged and be ready to test your knowledge at the end with a quiz. This training meets federal harassment prevention standards, but please check with your state laws for any additional requirements. Hi, I'm Harlow Reed, creator of the HR Insider. In my work as an employment lawyer and HR consultant, I've seen firsthand just how much of a difference supervisors can make when it comes to preventing harassment at work. When leaders take action, hold themselves accountable to standards, and respond quickly to concerns, it really sets the tone for a respectful and safe workplace where people feel valued and supported. But unfortunately, I've also seen what happens when that doesn't happen, when supervisors ignore issues or just don't take them seriously. It can lead to real emotional harm, not to mention low morale and just a breakdown of trust on the team altogether. Those experiences are why I am so passionate about this topic. I've created a dedicated playlist just for harassment training topics. If you're looking for state-specific training or you want to learn more about workplace harassment in general, be sure to check it out. I created this training to help supervisors understand the power they have to protect their teams and to show how small actions can make such a big difference. The content on this channel is for informational purposes only and shouldn't be taken as legal advice. Always consult a qualified attorney or HR professional for guidance on your specific situation. Okay, let's get started. Supervisors have additional responsibilities under federal law. In this training, you'll learn about your specific role in preventing, identifying, and addressing harassment in the workplace. Supervisors are held to a higher standard because, legally speaking, they are seen as an agent of the company. That means supervisors' actions and even their inaction are viewed as if the employer itself is acting. In other words, what you do reflects directly on the organization. And because of that, under federal guidelines, how you respond can directly affect whether your employer is held legally responsible for harassment alleged by an employee. Federal laws such as Title VII of the Civil Rights Act hold supervisors accountable for promptly addressing harassment. You must act immediately and appropriately when harassment is observed or reported. One of your first responsibilities as a supervisor is recognizing harassment when it happens. Harassment is a form of discrimination, but let's clarify what that really means. Distinguishing or noticing differences between people is something everyone does regularly. Managers, for instance, naturally notice differences among employees such as experience, skill sets, job performance, and often treat them accordingly. They might even notice differences based on personal interests like favorite musicians, sports teams, or hobbies, and none of that is illegal. However, discrimination crosses the line into unlawful behavior when employees are treated differently because of distinctions based on what's known as protected characteristics, protected categories, or protected class status. These categories include things like race, gender, religion, age, disability, and others protected by law. Okay, so let's review the protected categories recognized under federal law. They include race, which is covered by Title VII, color, which is covered by Title VII and Section 1981, national origin, which is covered by Title VII and IRCA, sex, which is covered by Title VII, including the Pregnancy Discrimination Act and Equal Pay Act, religion, which is covered by Title VII, disability, which is covered by ADA, the Americans with Disability Act, age, over 40 and older, which is covered by the Age Discrimination in Employment Act, genetic information, which is covered by GINA, alienage or citizenship, which is covered by Section 1981 and IRCA, military status, which is covered by USRA. You always have to check your state laws to ensure that you're aware of any additional protected categories that would be applicable to your location. There are several types of discriminatory practices that are considered unlawful. They include disparate treatment, disparate impact, harassment, and retaliation. Let's begin by looking at disparate treatment. Disparate treatment discrimination occurs when an employer treats certain employees or job applicants less favorably than others in similar situations because of a protected characteristic. This is often called intentional discrimination, and it's the most common type of discrimination claim. Disparate treatment can happen in nearly any employment decision, from hiring and job assignments to promotions, pay and benefits, discipline, even termination. Here are some examples of disparate treatment in the workplace. Posting a job ad that says recent college graduates only, which could unfairly exclude older applicants. Asking female applicants, but not male applicants, whether they're married, have children, or what their childcare plans are. Denying a promotion to an African American employee because the employer assumes customers would prefer a white employee in a customer-facing role. Or disciplining a 55-year-old employee for being late while excusing the same behavior from a younger employee who was also late without notice, and then justifying it by saying they had to drop a child off at school. Another example is firing a Muslim employee for making repeated mistakes, even though other non-Muslim employees made the same mistakes but were not disciplined. All of these examples reflect differential treatment that's based on a protected characteristic, and that's what makes them unlawful. If you want to see what it looks like when an employee comes forward with allegations of unlawful treatment, check out my video entitled The Case That Changed Tech Forever. It covers the Ellen Pio case and the impact it had on the tech industry. Okay, next up, let's talk about disparate impact. This type of discrimination is also prohibited by law and is sometimes called unintentional discrimination. That's because with disparate impact, it's not about what the employer meant to do, it's about the effect a policy or rule has on others. These claims come up when an employer creates a neutral policy, meaning it doesn't mention any protected characteristics, but when that rule is put into practice, it ends up having a negative and disproportionate impact on people from a protected group. So the focus isn't on the employer's intent, but rather the impact the rule has on others. Here are a few examples of disparate impact discrimination. An English-only policy in the workplace that an employer implements that requires all employees to speak English only at all times, even during breaks. Now, the rule itself doesn't mention national origin, but it can disproportionately affect employees who don't speak English as their first language. So, if English is a second language, it can create a barrier to full participation at work. Another example would be a company that refuses to hire anyone with a criminal record, regardless of the type of offense or how long ago it happened. This blanket policy may disproportionately impact African Americans and Latino applicants, even when the record has no relevance to the job they're applying to. Let's say an employer requires applicants to pass a physical strength test that's not actually related to the job duties. The test results in disproportionately fewer women being hired, even though the job doesn't require high physical strength. So, this kind of an assessment would raise concerns about gender-based disparate impact. So, the key in each of these examples is that the rule itself wasn't based on race, gender, or other protected characteristics, but the impact of the rule ended up hurting certain protected groups more than others. Managers play such a big role in preventing discrimination by making sure their decisions are based on objective, job related criteria that supports legitimate business needs. A helpful way to check that is by asking yourself a few simple questions when making an employment decision. Am I treating this employee differently than others with similar skills, performance, or experience? Am I handling this situation differently than I have with others who broke the same or similar rules? If the answer is no, then it's more likely that the decision is based on fair, job related criteria. But if the answer is yes, it's important to pause and ask why. If you're not being consistent, there should be a clear, legitimate reason, one that's tied to the job or business needs. Here are some examples of legitimate job related reasons a manager might treat employees differently. A manager may hold one employee to a stricter standard because their role carries greater responsibilities, like managing others, overseeing safety protocols, or handling sensitive information where higher expectations are necessary. A manager might discipline one employee for missing a deadline, but not the other employee because the first employee has a history of missed deadlines, while the second has consistently met expectations and this is their first offense. The key is consistency and having a clear business related reason behind the decision. Here's another example for supervisors to consider. Is this employment action truly based on business necessity? Let's say a manager denies a training opportunity to a 40-year-old employee, saying the training is better suited for younger employees who are more tech savvy. However, that 40-year-old employee has consistently demonstrated strong technical skills and has expressed interest in advancing within the company. Meanwhile, a younger employee with less experience and no specific interest in the training is selected to attend. This raises red flags. Even if the training selection seems informal or subjective, denying someone an opportunity based on assumptions about age rather than job performance or qualifications or duties of a job could be considered age discrimination. The right approach is to base decisions like these on documented performance, expressed interest, and business needs, not stereotypes or assumptions. I actually covered one example of what an illegitimate business reason looks like in a case where the employer's justification didn't hold up in court. It was a video about age discrimination, and it's called Workplace Investigations Gone Wrong: What Happens When Employers Mess Up. Make sure you check it out. Employers also have a legal obligation to provide reasonable accommodation in two key areas: a qualified disability or a sincerely held religious belief, as long as the accommodation allows the employee to perform the essential functions of the job and doesn't cause an undue hardship to the business. And here's the deal, and this is really important. Employees don't need to use special language or submit anything in writing to request an accommodation. Just using plain, everyday language is enough to put a supervisor on notice. That's why it's so important for supervisors to recognize when a request might be a request for an accommodation, even if it's informal, and then to connect with human resources right away to begin the ADA interactive process. Here are a few examples of workplace accommodations for employees with disabilities. An employee with severe anxiety may need a modified work schedule to avoid peak commute hours. An employee with a hearing impairment might need a sign language interpreter for meetings or a caption phone system. An employee recovering from surgery may need temporary telework or a phased return to work schedule. An employee with dyslexia might need written materials provided in an accessible format like audio or large print. An employee with chronic migraines may need adjustments to overhead lighting or permission to wear tinted glasses indoors. It's important to remember that accommodations should be tailored to the individual's specific needs and the essential functions of their job. Now, let's talk about undue hardship under the ADA. When considering a reasonable accommodation, employers are not required to provide one if it would cause an undue hardship. That means the accommodation would create significant difficulty or expense for the business. In order to determine that, several factors have to be considered, including the nature and cost of the accommodation, the financial resources of the specific facility, the overall financial resources of the company as a whole, and the structure and operations of the business, including how responsibilities are distributed, and finally, the impact that the accommodation would have on the facility's ability to operate effectively. So it's not just about cost, it's about whether the accommodation would disrupt the business or fundamentally alter how the work gets done. Now let's consider this scenario. An employee says they need a stool to sit on because of a back condition, but standing is a part of the job. Maybe you're not sure what's reasonable. Maybe other employees have already voiced concerns about special treatment. What's your next move? The ADA requires employers to explore reasonable accommodations, and that starts with an open, interactive conversation. You're not expected to have all the answers, but you are expected to take the request seriously and connect with HR to assess the options. Denying a request too quickly or failing to follow up can violate the law. Ask yourself, do I create an environment where employees feel safe asking for help when they need it? Am I aware of what my role is and what it isn't when an accommodation is requested? Have you ever worked in a place where an accommodation request was handled well or maybe poorly? Share your experience in the comments. What was the outcome and what lessons can others learn from it? Here are some common examples of accommodations for sincerely held religious beliefs. Allowing a schedule change or time off for religious holidays, providing breaks during the day for prayer, adjusting dress codes or grooming policies. For example, allowing a Muslim employee to wear a hijab or a Jewish employee to wear a yarmulke. There are two types of sexual harassment: quid pro quo and hostile work environment. Quid pro quo is a Latin term that means this for that. And sexual harassment occurs when someone, typically a manager or supervisor, someone with control and authority over another person, makes unwelcome sexual advances or makes requests for sexual favors. Going along with this behavior is either required to get or retain the job, or it influences promotions and other work decisions that affect the person. If you want to know more about workplace harassment laws and how they have developed over time and why standing up against harassment is so important, you have to check out my video, The Sexual Harassment Case That Changed Everything. The video shares insight about workplace harassment laws, but it is also a powerful story about the courage one young woman took to make a difference in her workplace that ultimately changed the workplace for all of us. Now let's talk about the second kind of harassment: hostile work environment. A hostile work environment isn't just about having a bad boss or a coworker that curses a lot or someone who's annoying you at work. The behavior has to meet specific legal requirements. So, what we're going to do now is look at how behaviors at work cross the line and become illegal harassment. The first condition that has to be met for behavior to be considered as harassment is unwelcome conduct. This means the behavior is not invited, it's not wanted, and it makes someone uncomfortable. If an employee is feeling pressured or disrespected or just overall uncomfortable about comments that are being made, jokes that are being told, or specific actions that make them feel uneasy, that's considered unwelcome conduct. And the person who's doing it doesn't have to intend to cause harm or intend to make the other person who's receiving and observing the behavior uncomfortable. What matters is how it is received, how the person who witnesses the behavior or the conduct or the words that are being spoken, how that person feels. The second condition is conduct that's based on a protected characteristic. So, for behaviors to legally qualify as a hostile work environment, it has to be linked to an employee's race, gender, religion, disability, age, sexual orientation, or another protected characteristic. What we're talking about is when you are being treated unfairly because of who you are. Not because you have a disagreement with someone at work, not because you have a conflict, not because there's a personality issue, but you are being singled out and treated differently because of who you are. The third and final condition required to meet the legal standard for a hostile work environment is behavior that has a severe or pervasive impact on work that is being done. And the behavior has to be so bad and so frequent that it negatively affects someone's job. So a single inappropriate comment might not be enough, but constant harassment, ongoing intimidation, or extreme behavior that makes work unbearable, that would satisfy this third and final condition. And this really matters because not every bad work environment is a legal, hostile work environment. But if behavior is unwelcome, if it is discriminatory behavior and it is severe or happens enough to impact someone else's job, it is illegal. If you want to understand what it really means to work in a hostile environment, check out my video, Workplace Mobbing and Retaliation in Medicine. It takes a really close look at the reality of workplace harassment and how toxic group behavior can push employees out and the legal protections that exist. Plus, you'll hear a very powerful story about a woman who stood against the odds to fight for her right to work in a harassment free environment. So check it out. The link is in the description. Let's take a look at some examples of behavior that can make a workplace feel toxic. It's important to remember that what may seem appropriate to you might be perceived as inappropriate and even hostile to someone else. An open magazine left lying on your desk with models in swimsuits could be offensive and become the subject of a complaint. Harassment can be created through personal devices. They can also be the subject of complaints and create liability for employers. It's also important for supervisors to recognize subtle forms of harassment and hostile work environments. Supervisors have to address harassment even without a formal complaint. Let's talk about specific examples that apply to supervisors. For a real life example of subtle retaliation in the workplace, watch my video, Covert Retaliation Explained. It breaks down how retaliation can show up in less obvious ways and why it still matters. When supervisors receive a complaint, they should listen objectively and document thoroughly. Supervisors are expected to report the complaint to human resources right away. Don't wait or try to handle it on your own. You also need to keep the information as confidential as possible and be extra careful not to do anything that could come across as retaliation. Retaliation happens when an employer takes negative or adverse action against an employee because they engaged in a protected activity. Protected activity can include things like filing a complaint about discrimination or harassment, and the employee is protected even if the complaint isn't ultimately proven, as long as it was made in good faith. Other examples of protected activity include participating in an investigation, for example, serving as a witness or requesting a reasonable accommodation for a disability or religious belief. Supervisors need to be especially careful here because retaliation is one of the most common legal claims that employers face, and it's often stemmed from situations where the employee exercised a right they were legally entitled to do. Supervisors also have a responsibility to actively prevent retaliation. So make sure that you communicate to your team that retaliation will not be tolerated. After a complaint has been made, keep a close eye on your unit, your workplace, and those interactions that are taking place among your team members to ensure that retaliation does not happen. If you want to know more about retaliation at work, check out my video that covers the legal case of University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center versus Nassar. It is an eye-opening case that really sheds light on retaliation and how employees experience it and supervisors respond as well. Now, take a moment to consider this. An employee raises a complaint about how they were treated, and shortly after, they're reassigned to less desirable shifts. You know it wasn't done out of spite. Maybe it was based on scheduling needs or performance history, but still, how does it look from the outside? Retaliation isn't just about intent, it's about impact. Even if a decision was made for valid reasons, if the timing makes it seem like punishment for speaking up, that perception alone can create legal risk. Ask yourself, do I document my decisions well enough to show they're based on business needs, not personal feelings? Am I working closely with human resources anytime an employment action follows a complaint? Have you ever seen a situation where someone felt punished after making a complaint, even if it wasn't intentional? Share your thoughts in the comments below. What happened and what could have been done differently to avoid that perception? Failing to respond appropriately to harassment reports can result in personal as well as organizational liability. Recent court cases reinforce the importance of prompt, fair, and thorough responses to claims of harassment. And if harassment or company policy violation is confirmed, supervisors might also need to enforce disciplinary actions. Supervisors will also need to make sure that their actions follow their organization's policies and comply with federal guidelines. We've covered a lot today, so let's quickly recap your responsibilities as a supervisor. Proactively identifying harassment, responding quickly and effectively to complaints, keeping clear, accurate documentation, actively preventing retaliation, and fully cooperating with investigations and following through with corrective actions. Now that we've covered key aspects of workplace harassment prevention, it's time to test your knowledge. Click the link in the description to take the official quiz. Congratulations, you made it through harassment prevention training for supervisors. Your role as a supervisor is critical in creating and maintaining a safe and respectful workplace. Don't forget to take the official quiz and subscribe to the HR Insider for more workplace training videos. Like, comment, and share to help others stay informed. Thanks for watching.